They were called holy knights, sworn to protect pilgrims on dangerous roads. Yet even from the beginning, something about their mission carried a paradox that history seldom acknowledges. If their task was truly to guard travelers, why did they spend so little time riding across deserts and valleys, and instead remain fixed upon a single location year after year, as though anchored to a mystery buried beneath their feet? The paradox lies not in what they promised the world, but in what they silently withheld. If you believe this story is worth continuing, hit subscribe not just to follow, but to keep these unanswered questions alive. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. In the year 1119, 9 men stood apart from the restless armies and mercenaries of Europe, declaring themselves servants of God, defenders of Christ, and protectors of the helpless. Yet the place they chose as their base was not a roadside inn, nor a fortress along the pilgrim routes, but the Temple Mount of Jerusalem itself. They were granted permission to reside within the remnants of Solomon's temple, a ground revered in legend as once housing sacred treasures, chambers of wisdom, and perhaps relics from times even older than the Hebrews themselves. The paradox deepens here. Knights entrusted with guarding the roads instead entrenched themselves in the ruins of a temple, vanishing from public sight for nearly a decade. What if their noble vow was but a veil, a story spoken aloud while a different mission unfolded in silence for nearly 9 years? Their lances rarely shone in the sunlit fields of Palestine. Their horses were seldom seen patrolling the roads from Jaffa to the Holy City. Instead, reports suggest they worked tirelessly upon the mount, not above it, but beneath it. The chronicles fall strangely quiet, and in that quiet, suspicion begins to take root. Centuries later, when British archaeologists stumbled upon tunnel systems winding under Jerusalem, carved stone passages descending into darkness, they found scattered remnants, spurs, tools, fragments of gear, unmistakably Templar in origin. Were these accidental losses dropped by knights stationed nearby, or traces of a systematic excavation? The question remains unanswered, but the coincidence is too sharp to ignore. If guardianship of pilgrims was truly their only purpose, why linger for years over the very ruins whispered to conceal secrets of unimaginable power? Some believe their presence upon the Temple Mount was no accident of faith, but an orchestrated cover. The Crusaders had conquered Jerusalem with blood and fire, but what these 9 knights sought was not victory over infidels nor safety for the faithful, but access to chambers unseen, knowledge forbidden, artifacts that could rewrite the order of heaven and earth. The Temple of Solomon, destroyed centuries earlier by Babylon and later by Rome, had long since become a place of dust and memory. Yet legends held that its foundations concealed hidden vaults, sealed passages that even conquerors had failed to plunder. Jewish lore spoke of treasures hidden away before the Babylonian siege, objects of gold, sacred vessels, perhaps even the Ark itself, spirited into chambers below. But alongside relics of faith were whispers of something stranger, older, drawn from a time before Israelite priests recorded their chants, before empires carved laws into stone. There were murmurs of ancient sciences, forbidden tablets, devices that glowed with light no oil could feed, and powders capable of bending life itself. Could it be that the Templars, cloaked as monks in armor, were in truth excavators of a memory deliberately buried beneath Jerusalem? Their 9 years of silence become less the absence of duty and more the presence of a mission shielded from eyes above. And here lies the paradox. Knights known for open valor upon the battlefield, sworn to live in simplicity and poverty, yet dwelling for nearly a decade in secrecy, digging for something unseen. What compulsion could hold them so firmly beneath one ruined mount? When one steps back and surveys the broader picture, a pattern emerges like a faint watermark upon a faded manuscript. The Templars were not ordinary soldiers, nor were they bound only by vows of poverty and chastity. They were organized with extraordinary discipline, trained in record-keeping, architecture, and logistics, masters of secrecy as much as of the sword. To entrust them with access to the Temple Mount was not merely to give them shelter, but to hand them the key to the most mysterious site of the ancient world. If any group could unearth what lay beneath the ruins, it was they. And what if what they found was not relics alone, but remembrance? Remembrance of a world drowned and denied, a world spoken of by Plato as Atlantis, a world where cities shone with energies modern science has scarcely begun to name. To believe this possibility is to accept that Jerusalem itself, cradle of three great religions, was more than holy ground. It was a portal to a memory predating faith, empire, and even written time. Some accounts suggest that whispers of Atlantis had already reached the Templars through Byzantine scholars, through merchants who traded it in Constantinople, through secretive orders known as the Brothers of the East. According to these whispers, fragments of Atlantean lore had been carried across millennia, hidden in scrolls, transmitted through oral teachings, preserved in obscure sects that clung to fragments of a drowned wisdom. And when the Templars dug beneath Solomon's temple, were they not searching for these fragments? For the artifacts said to carry the echo of that vanished world? The silence of 9 years may conceal more than the mere act of excavation. It may conceal encounters, discoveries, perhaps even artifacts spirited away under cover of piety. But the question remains, what force could compel knights bound by oaths to risk everything, to endure suspicion, to labor in secret darkness beneath sacred ground? Some say it was the promise of power. Others claim it was fear that if they did not guard the knowledge, it would fall into unworthy hands. Or perhaps it was reverence, a conviction that to touch the remnants of Atlantis was to brush against the very marrow of creation. What if beneath the stones of Solomon's temple lay more than relics of Israel's past? What if it was a chamber of memory, a vault of the forgotten world, a place where fragments of Atlantis had been hidden to outlast the flood, the conquest, and the fire of time? If so, then the Templars' mission was never about roads or pilgrims, but about safeguarding the bridge between what humanity was told to remember and what it was commanded to forget. The paradox remains unsolved, suspended like an unanswered question in the shadow of Jerusalem's walls. Did 9 men truly spend nearly a decade guarding weary travelers, or were they burrowing into the earth, tracing the lost veins of a forgotten empire? The silence does not answer. Yet the silence itself is eloquent. It whispers that something beneath the temple was found, or at the very least sought with such fervor that 9 years could vanish into dust without a word spoken. And so history leaves us with this enigma, a door slightly ajar but never opened wide. The knights who swore to serve God and protect the weak may have been servants of another calling, one older, one forbidden, one entwined with the drowned memory of Atlantis. Jerusalem became their crucible, their veil, their labyrinth of silence. The true mission of the Templars begins not upon the battlefield, but in the earth beneath a ruined temple, where paradox deepens into suspicion and suspicion hardens into mystery. Beneath the Temple Mount, where centuries of prayer rose and fell like tides, the knights remained, their armor silent, their purpose veiled. For 9 unbroken years, they scarcely appeared upon the roads they had sworn to guard. Yet within the heart of Jerusalem, they endured like shadows fixed upon ancient stone. Their absence from battle was explained as discipline, their seclusion as piety. But the paradox pressed harder with each passing season. What demanded such secrecy, such patience, such unyielding devotion beneath ruins already declared holy long before their arrival? The chronicles speak little. Yet the ground itself whispers louder. In the 19th century, long after the Templars had vanished into history's silence, explorers uncovered traces of passageways carved deep below the mount, stone tunnels stretching like veins into the earth. Their purpose obscure, their age uncertain, Among the dust lay spurs, fragments of equipment and tools strangely dated to the very years when the Templars had resided above. Were these chance relics dropped by guards passing through, or the evidence of a hidden enterprise? The answer remains cloaked. Yet the coincidence is sharp, almost deliberate, as if history itself sought to leave behind a faint watermark of what truly transpired. 9 years, neither a campaign nor a pilgrimage nor a moment of watchfulness, but nearly a decade of unbroken silence beneath Jerusalem's most sacred ground. Above, the world saw nights spent kneeling in prayer, cloaked in poverty, disciplined in simplicity. Below, unseen, there may have been the scrape of iron against stone, the murmur of labor, the secret rhythm of men driven by something more than vows of charity. A paradox without explanation. Warriors who did not war, guardians who did not guard, protectors who disappeared into hidden chambers. What could justify such devotion? The theory grows that they were not guarding the temple, but excavating it, not honoring its ruins, but probing beneath them. Legends older than the Crusaders had already whispered that Solomon's temple concealed more than altars and vessels. Jewish traditions hinted at treasures hidden away before Babylon's destruction, relics buried so deep they might never see light again. Yet woven through the faith of Israel were stranger rumors, hints of devices that glowed with unearthly brilliance, tablets etched in forbidden scripts, powders and substances beyond the comprehension of medieval men. Some say the Templars were not the first to hear these whispers. In Constantinople, merchants carried tales of lost wisdom. In the Byzantine libraries, cloistered scholars guarded scrolls that traced back not merely to prophets, but to a civilization that had drowned long before Moses ever walked. These stories spoke of a world swallowed by the ocean, an empire radiant with science and spirit, a kingdom later remembered by Plato as Atlantis. The connection was tenuous, yet the fragments aligned like constellations glimpsed through shifting clouds. If survivors of Atlantis had scattered across the earth, carrying with them maps, symbols, and strange knowledge, where better to hide them than beneath a temple already steeped in reverence? Thus, Jerusalem becomes more than a holy city. It becomes a threshold, a place where memory converges with myth, where knights cloaked in sanctity dig for something older than their faith. And so the paradox sharpens. They claimed the mantle of guardians, yet what they guarded was not pilgrims, but silence, not lives, but secrets. The deeper question haunts each detail unearthed. Were they uncovering relics of Israel's sacred past, or were they seeking fragments of a drowned world preserved in hidden vaults to outlast flood, empire, and time itself? In the archives of later centuries, whispers arise of the Brothers of the East, guardians of an esoteric tradition, men who spoke of Atlantean survivors who preserved their wisdom across deserts and oceans. Some accounts suggest that Templar envoys wandering through Constantinople or Antioch came into contact with such men. From them, they heard of a substance, a powder, luminous and fine, said to awaken the hidden potential of the human body and mind. This powder, called manna, was not nourishment alone, but a spiritual catalyst, something that bridged flesh and spirit, matter and light. Legends claimed it healed the sick, prolonged life, opened vision into higher realms, even bent the forces of sound and vibration. And if such a thing were hidden beneath Jerusalem's ancient stones, would not 9 years of silence be justified? The Templars may have believed themselves chosen, not merely to defend the faith of pilgrims, but to recover the lost inheritance of humanity itself. They were no longer knights alone, but excavators of forgotten science, guardians of a knowledge too dangerous to be left in the open. What they sought may not have been relics of faith, but instruments of transformation, devices or substances whose origin lay in a civilization erased by the ocean, yet remembered in fragments of myth. Archaeologists cannot prove what lies beneath the mount, for the ground remains forbidden to modern spades. Yet the alignment of clues, 9 silent years, discovered tunnels, artifacts dated to their presence, whispers of a white powder of power, converge with such insistence that dismissal feels like willful blindness. The paradox has shifted from curiosity to suspicion. What if the greatest mission of the Templars was not their visible crusade, but their invisible excavation? Not the defense of pilgrims, but the unearthing of a buried world. Their silence grows louder with each retelling. Knights sworn to openness of valor instead concealed their truest work beneath vows of obedience. 9 years vanish into dust, and history records nothing more than their presence on holy ground. Yet in that void, a deeper narrative forms, one that stretches not from battlefields, but from drowned continents. Not from vows of poverty, but from fragments of forbidden wealth, wealth of knowledge, wealth of power, wealth of memory. And so the story darkens as though the torch carried down those tunnels has never been extinguished, its light still flickering against the walls of time. What were they digging for? What did they believe they would find? Was it a relic of Solomon, a treasure of Israel, or something older, something Atlantis itself had sought to preserve for those who dared return? The silence does not answer, yet silence itself often conceals more than words. Perhaps beneath the Temple Mount lies not the foundation of a vanished building, but the root of a vanished world. If so, then the 9 silent years of the Templars mark not a pause in duty, but the beginning of a secret mission. A mission not yet completed. A mission that still echoes in whispers of Atlantean knowledge, buried, forbidden, waiting for the day when silence is broken. Tunnels in shadow often reveal more than chronicles written in ink. And centuries after the Templars had vanished, fragments of stone and iron seemed to testify to their unspoken mission. In 1867, long after the order was dissolved and its secrets buried under accusations of heresy, British explorers entered Jerusalem and began surveying the Temple Mount. What they found beneath its surface shook the silence of history. Corridors carved in ancient times, walls marked by deliberate chiseling, and chambers concealed as though waiting for eyes patient enough to find them. Within these depths, scattered like forgotten offerings, lay iron spurs, buckles, fragments of gear, unmistakably tied to the 12th century, the very years when the Templars resided above. Historians may argue coincidence, claiming the tunnels predated the Knights, that artifacts were dropped casually or misplaced. Yet the convergence is haunting. Why should relics from the age of the Templars lie precisely where tunnels extend? And why should those tunnels mirror alignments suspected of purposeful excavation? The silence of 9 years above now finds a faint echo below, as though the earth itself had preserved their secret in its dark veins. But what purpose could justify such labor, hidden from both pilgrim and priest? The theory rises that the Templars were digging not for relics of Israel alone, but for something older, something that could not be spoken of in churches or confessed in chapels. Legends told of chambers hidden deep within, vaults sealed before Babylon's fires, secrets carried by priests fleeing conquest. Yet beyond sacred vessels and golden relics, stories whispered of stranger prizes, artifacts that defied ordinary craft, devices that seemed to hum with power, and scrolls describing sciences the medieval mind could scarcely grasp. What if these tunnels were not the remains of some forgotten construction, but scars of a deliberate search for knowledge forbidden to surface? What if beneath the temple lay fragments of a civilization drowned in ocean and myth, fragments preserved through exile, conquest, and silence? The tunnels themselves become testimony, not simply of passage, but of intent, cut by hands who believed they were closer to memory than to myth. Some modern researchers argue that these tunnels align with entrances known from Crusader times, suggesting deliberate use by those who occupied the mount. Others go further, claiming that the structures bear marks of excavation too precise, too systematic to be explained by chance habitation. Whether true or exaggerated, the suspicion remains. The Templars did not spend 9 years praying in quiet humility. They spent them excavating beneath the ruins of Solomon, hunting for something worth more than crowns, relics, or gold. And what they might have sought connects back to a whisper repeated across cultures. Atlantis, the shining island described by Plato, was said to have vanished beneath the sea thousands of years before, destroyed by flood, quake, or punishment. Yet stories insisted its wisdom survived, carried by refugees who seeded fragments of their knowledge in Egypt, Mesopotamia, and beyond. Could the Temple Mount itself have been chosen as a vault for such remnants, hidden away so that only those entrusted with sacred duty might dare recover them? The paradox continues. Knights revered for their piety, supported by popes and kings, operated under the guise of guardianship, yet labored in silence beneath holy ground. Pilgrims thought them protectors. Europe praised them as martyrs, but beneath Jerusalem, they may have become something else entirely. Archaeologists of the forbidden, seekers of drowned memory. Their swords were sheathed, yet their hands wielded pick and chisel. Their prayers masked the scrape of stone against stone, the echo of tunnels forming in the dark. If true, then the Templars were neither heretics nor saints, but something more unsettling, custodians of a legacy designed to remain unseen. The tunnels in shadow represent more than physical passageways. They are metaphors of secrecy itself, corridors of forgotten memory running parallel beneath the narrative told above. History speaks of battles, treaties, papal bulls, and holy vows. Yet beneath that narrative runs another, silent, obscured, yet persistent. Like a subterranean river, carving its way unseen until it reshapes the land, the question lingers. What did the Templars find in those depths? Was it the Ark of the Covenant hidden away before Babylon's conquest? Was it scrolls describing sciences that modern physics only now begins to rediscover? Or was it something stranger still, a fragment of Atlantis itself, concealed in Jerusalem as though the city were chosen not merely as a holy site, but as a vault of drowned worlds? The absence of answers becomes its own evidence, for silence often conceals truths too dangerous to utter. The tunnels endure, sealed, their entrance guarded by faith and politics, yet their very existence speaks louder than chronicles that omit them. For if the Templars truly spent nearly a decade vanishing into shadow, and if artifacts tied to their time lie buried in those chambers, then history as written omits more than it admits. It omits the possibility that one of the most powerful orders of Christendom was never what it claimed to be. It omits the possibility that their true mission was to unearth a memory deliberately buried to ensure mankind would never awaken into it again. And in the silence of those tunnels, one can almost hear the echo of chisels, the murmur of Latin prayers disguising secret labor, and the whisper of a question still unanswered. What waits in the shadowed depths that history refuses to name? Forbidden artifacts are seldom displayed in the open, for their very existence unsettles the stories empires prefer to tell. And when the Templars lingered beneath the Temple Mount, whispers began to surface that what they sought was neither coin nor relics of gold, but objects of power whose origin lay outside Scripture. Centuries later, fragments of rumor tell of items recovered from those hidden chambers, described not as ordinary treasures, but as tools strange in form, charged with purposes no crusader was prepared to explain. A spur unearthed in the dust might be dismissed, yet alongside it are tales of relics that could illuminate darkened halls without flame, tablets inscribed with letters that shifted as the eye moved, and vessels said to resonate like living instruments when struck by human voice. To the medieval mind, such stories blurred the line between miracle and heresy, yet their persistence suggests something tangible lay at their heart. The Church spoke of relics from Israel's ancient kings, sacred vessels protected by priests fleeing Babylon's armies, perhaps even fragments of the Ark itself hidden beneath the ruins. But others whispered that these artifacts carried signatures of an origin older still, one not tied to Israel, but to Atlantis, that drowned island said to wield sciences so advanced they appeared as magic to later ages. The paradox emerges again. Why would knights sworn to defend pilgrims risk everything to unearth devices they could scarcely explain, unless they believed those devices were not curiosities but keys to a forgotten inheritance. Among the most provocative tales are those of crystalline lamps, their glow unending, recovered from chambers sealed long before Rome's legions marched. Some accounts speak of spheres that vibrated when held, as though harmonizing with unseen energies, or of tablets carved with geometric patterns mirroring the stars above Jerusalem's sky. If true, these objects were more than relics. They were fragments of a system, pieces of a knowledge designed to bind matter and spirit, light and stone. To unearth them was not simply to possess a treasure, but to awaken a memory carefully concealed. And yet, curiously, no chronicle of the church records such discoveries. The silence is as telling as testimony. When entire orders were later condemned as heretics, when knights were accused of worshiping strange idols or venerating heads of stone, might those charges have been distorted echoes of artifacts too dangerous to describe openly? Could the Baphomet of accusation have been less a demon than a device, misunderstood by inquisitors, yet treasured by knights who believed it embodied the wisdom of ages before the flood? The forbidden becomes heretical not because it is false, but because it challenges the fragile lattice upon which authority rests. It is said that when the Templars left Jerusalem, they carried with them not only wealth granted by kings, but chests sealed and unmarked, transported across deserts and seas under the cover of night. Some arrived in Europe, hidden within monasteries or fortresses. Others vanished entirely, perhaps loaded onto ships that later disappeared without record. The pattern repeats across centuries, artifacts that surface briefly, then vanish again into vaults, as though the world were not ready to see them. And yet, each rumor, each fragment of description draws the outline of a puzzle too deliberate to ignore. If beneath Solomon's temple there lay objects from Atlantis, then Jerusalem was more than holy. It was a repository, a vault in stone chosen to endure empire and conquest, awaiting only those bold enough to seek it. The Templars, cloaked as guardians, may have believed themselves such seekers, heirs to a mission older than their vows. They swore obedience to Pope and King. But beneath the earth, they served a different master, the silence of lost worlds, calling them deeper into shadow. What these forbidden artifacts truly were remains uncertain, yet their descriptions carry strange resonance with discoveries of modern times. Devices that respond to vibration mirror our understanding of resonance and frequency. Powders said to extend life echo modern whispers of monatomic gold. Tablets that change as one reads evoke quantum principles scarcely understood today. Could it be that the Templars were not stumbling into superstition, but recovering fragments of a science so ancient it now appears prophetic? And so the paradox sharpens. The knights celebrated for valor may have been despised for possession of truths too dangerous to reveal. Truths the church could not assimilate without fracturing its power. Their silence about these artifacts was not weakness, but necessity. For to speak of them openly would invite destruction. And destruction came, not because they failed as warriors but because they succeeded too well as seekers. The forbidden is always erased from chronicles. Yet traces endure in accusations of idolatry, in legends of chests spirited away, in whispers of ships that vanished carrying more than gold. The artifacts themselves remain hidden, but their shadow stretches across centuries, casting suspicion upon the official record. What did they find beneath the Temple Mount that transformed guardians into heretics, knights into secrets, crusaders into legends whispered with unease? The silence of the artifacts is not emptiness. It is a deliberate concealment, a reminder that beneath every official account lies a darker stratum of memory, one written not in ink, but in shadow. And in that shadow, the Templars' forbidden discoveries remain, unseen, unspoken, yet waiting, as though history itself were guarding them still. The true target of the Templars, silence was never the pilgrim roads they were praised for protecting, but something veiled beneath centuries of conquest, something they pursued with patience that outlasted crusades, treaties, and papal decrees. When kings bestowed land and gold, when popes granted privileges unmatched by any order, the knights appeared outwardly grateful, yet their eyes remained fixed upon a purpose deeper than wealth or favor. Why would men, bound by vows of poverty, amass treasures vast enough to rival monarchs, unless those treasures served as fuel for a mission too perilous to disclose? Whispers began to circulate that what the Templars guarded most fiercely was not coin but knowledge. Not relics for display in churches, but artifacts capable of altering humanity's understanding of itself. Pilgrims saw their chapels filled with solemn ritual. Nobles saw their coffers overflowing. But within the inner chambers of commanderies, the silence was thick with unspoken intent. Those who drew close to the order noticed an intensity in their eyes, a discipline that seemed to exceed even their vows, as though they carried a burden invisible to outsiders. The paradox remained. Were they warriors of the cross or curators of something older, darker? And forbidden legends arose, that beneath the Temple Mount they had uncovered not relics of Israel's kings alone, but fragments of Atlantean lore, maps inscribed with constellations unrecorded by medieval astronomy, devices that hummed in resonance with the human voice, scrolls describing the manipulation of light and sound to heal or destroy. Such rumors, if true, would explain the secrecy of their 9 years in Jerusalem, for no church could sanction knowledge that undermined its monopoly on mystery. If salvation could be sought through frequencies, if divine communion could be invoked through powers and vibrations, what then of sacraments, of priests, of the very authority that crowned kings and enthroned popes? The true target, it seems, was memory itself. To excavate beneath Solomon's temple was to probe the bedrock of human history, to seek the drowned fragments of a world erased yet not extinguished. What if Atlantis, said to have perished in a single night of fire and flood, had prepared for its own annihilation by scattering its wisdom into vaults across the earth? What if Jerusalem, chosen for its sanctity and centrality, had become one of these vaults, a chamber of memory disguised as holy ruin? The Templars, then, were not merely knights, but chosen custodians tasked with recovering what humanity had been commanded to forget. Evidence of their obsession lingers in scattered fragments across Europe. Strange inscriptions in commandery chapels depict geometric patterns mirroring constellations. Manuscripts copied in Templar script contain cryptic references to white powders, luminous stones, and vessels of light. Accounts by enemies describe idols worshipped in secret, heads said to speak when approached, though such accusations may have been distortions of artifacts too dangerous to name. To a suspicious church, these were signs of heresy. To the Templars, they may have been reminders of a mission more sacred than any oath to pope or king. Why risk everything for such objects? Why labor for years in tunnels? Why conceal discoveries so jealously? Unless they believed these artifacts were not curiosities, but instruments of power. Some chronicles suggest that the Templars, once exposed to this hidden knowledge, changed in manner, becoming more focused, more secretive, less entangled in the ordinary affairs of crusaders. Their true target had shifted from protecting pilgrims to protecting a secret so vast it could fracture the world. And herein lies the quiet dread. If they truly found fragments of Atlantis, then their silence was not merely protective, but necessary. No medieval society could have survived such revelations intact. To glimpse the true target is to understand why the Order's downfall was swift and merciless. Kings indebted to them feared their influence. Popes once supportive grew wary of whispers surrounding their rituals. And ordinary believers began to murmur that these knights were more than holy defenders. They were keepers of forbidden light. The paradox hardened into suspicion, and suspicion into persecution. Yet before their destruction, there are hints that they had already succeeded in spiriting away the essence of what they had found, distributing it into hidden strongholds, concealing it within coded manuscripts, perhaps even sending it across oceans on ships that vanished into legend. If the Templars' true target was memory itself, then their mission has never truly ended. The knowledge they uncovered, fragments of Atlantean inheritance, may still lie dormant in vaults beneath churches, in symbols etched upon cathedral walls, in legends of treasures lost at sea. History records their suppression, their trial, their execution. But history does not record the full measure of what they preserved. That omission may be the clearest proof of all. For silence does not erase a truth. It only guards it, waiting for the moment when the world is ready to face it. The question lingers in shadow. Was the Templars' true mission to defend faith, or to defend a secret so vast it could shatter faith itself? Their target was never the Pilgrim's Road. Their target was the vault of humanity's forgotten past. And perhaps even now, that target remains guarded in silence, hidden in places we are not permitted to see. Echoes of Atlantis ripple through cultures separated by oceans and centuries, surfacing in myths that refuse to die. And within the silence of the Templars, those echoes grow louder, as though the knights had stumbled upon a memory deliberately buried, yet too resilient to remain hidden. Plato wrote of a shining island beyond the Pillars of Hercules, a realm of great ships and radiant cities destroyed in a single night of fire and flood. Scholars dismiss it as allegory, yet fragments of the same story recur across Egypt, Mesopotamia, the Andes, and even distant Polynesia, each describing a world swallowed by waters, yet leaving behind survivors who carried fragments of their wisdom. How can myths born on opposite sides of the earth echo so precisely, unless they share a common root? The Templars' 9 years beneath Jerusalem may have been fueled by these very whispers, for they were not ignorant soldiers, but men exposed to Eastern archives, Byzantine merchants, and Arab scholars who preserved stories Europe had long forgotten. In Constantinople especially, legends of a drowned civilization were guarded by monks who spoke of survivors wandering across deserts with maps of stars and tablets of stone. To these whispers, the Templars added their own discoveries, fragments from beneath the Temple Mount that seemed to confirm the impossible, that the wisdom of Atlantis had not vanished entirely, but lay scattered, waiting to be reassembled. Consider the artifacts described in rumor, tablets whose inscriptions shifted before the reader's eyes, vessels that resonated with the human voice, powers that shimmered with light. Such objects align uncannily with descriptions of Atlantean science, technologies based not upon iron or fire, but upon resonance, vibration, and the manipulation of energy fields. Plato wrote that the Atlanteans mastered forces of the earth itself, channeling power from crystals and harmonizing with natural lines of energy. Medieval knights could not have invented such concepts. Yet their secret rituals and symbols hint at knowledge far beyond their age, as though the order had become custodians of something unearthed, something never meant for their hands. If Atlantis did perish, might not its wisest guardians have hidden fragments of their knowledge in lands destined to outlast the flood? Egypt's Zep-Tepi, the first time when gods walked among men, may have been nothing more than the recollection of Atlantean refugees teaching their science to the Nile Valley. Mesopotamian epics describing sages who emerged from the sea may reflect the same memory. And Jerusalem, the ancient crossroads of empire and faith, may have been chosen as a vault, a chamber where relics of the drowned world could be concealed under layers of sanctity. The Templars, knowingly or unknowingly, became heirs to that trust. Legends recorded by Arab chroniclers spoke of hidden books buried beneath Solomon's temple, inscribed in languages no man could read, containing secrets of stars and alchemy. Jewish mystics whispered of treasures concealed before Babylon's conquest, some crafted by angels, others said to predate creation itself. For knights trained in discipline and secrecy, these stories were not superstition, but compass points directing their silent excavations. Each tale was a clue, each myth a fragment of a greater whole. And together they suggested that beneath Jerusalem lay more than relics of Hebrew kings. It held echoes of a world erased from memory. The paradox is sharp. A Christian order sworn to defend pilgrims was instead unearthing the bones of a civilization pagan in origin, condemned by the church as myth, yet preserved in silence across cultures. To admit such a discovery would have been to undermine centuries of doctrine. For if Atlantis had indeed existed, then the history taught by priests and scholars alike was incomplete, perhaps even deliberately rewritten. The Templars' silence, then, was not merely for protection, but for survival, for to reveal their findings would have invited annihilation long before their eventual fall. And yet, hints remain in their architecture. Cathedrals they built across Europe resonate with geometries that echo Atlantean myth. Rose windows aligned to solstices, spires rising like crystalline towers, labyrinths carved into floors mirroring maps of vanished lands. These structures are sermons in stone, veiled codices carrying the imprint of a knowledge they could not openly proclaim. Why else would Masons labor to align churches with constellations, to inscribe patterns of sacred geometry upon walls meant only for prayer? Each stone is an echo, each arch a whisper of a memory preserved in code. If the Templars were seekers of Atlantis, then their mission was never completed, for fragments of the drowned world could not be assembled into wholeness. But the pursuit itself was dangerous enough, and therein lies the reason their order became feared. Kings feared their independence, popes feared their silence, and the church as a whole feared that these knights had touched a truth older and more powerful than Scripture itself. The accusation of heresy may have been a mask to conceal a deeper threat, that the Templars, in their pursuit of Atlantis, had discovered enough to shatter the fragile architecture of official history. What if Atlantis was not simply a lost island, but the origin point of all myths of gods, giants, and sages? What if every culture's memory of a golden age of beings who taught science, medicine, and architecture is but a refracted echo of the same drowned civilization? And what if the Templars in their excavations stumbled upon a fragment of this echo preserved in stone, powder, and script beneath Jerusalem's sacred ground? The echoes continue, faint but insistent, weaving through the silence of cathedrals and the labyrinth of history, whispering that the story of humanity is older, stranger, and more deliberately concealed than we have been allowed to know. The Brothers of the East surface in scattered accounts like shadows moving at the edges of history. Described as guardians of knowledge, older than temples, older than kings, older even than written script itself, medieval chroniclers mention them only in whispers, as scholars cloaked in foreign robes who carried fragments of teaching said to descend from a time before the flood. Fragments not of faith, but of power. According to certain accounts, Templar envoys encountered these men during travels through Constantinople, Antioch, or along the trade routes stretching eastward, and from them they received tales so strange that even seasoned knights fell silent at the weight of the words. These brothers spoke of Atlantis not as myth, but as memory, insisting that its fall had not destroyed everything, that remnants of its wisdom survived like embers hidden beneath ash, waiting for those bold enough to recover them. The knowledge they described was not written in the language of theology, but of vibration, resonance, and light. They told of cities built not by stone alone, but by harmonizing matter with sound, of towers that pulsed like crystals, glowing as they drew energy from the earth's veins. They spoke of medicine that worked not through herbs or steel, but through color, frequency, and intention, of a science inseparable from spirit, so advanced it would appear miraculous to later ages. To the Templars, trained in discipline and secrecy, such stories must have struck both wonder and dread. Could it be that beneath Jerusalem, where they labored in silence, fragments of these teachings still lay concealed? The paradox of the Brothers of the East lies in their invisibility. They appear in legends across cultures, sometimes as wandering sages, sometimes as survivors of drowned lands, always carrying knowledge that defies the accepted order. In Mesopotamian epics, figures rise from the sea to teach men how to write and build. In Egyptian myths, gods arrive in the Nile Valley bearing the sciences of the stars. Even in distant Asia, stories linger of sages who preserved wisdom through cataclysms. Are these scattered tales merely allegory, or do they reflect the same lineage, a chain of memory extending back to Atlantis itself? The Templars, it is said, listened with rapt attention, and perhaps in these whispers they recognized confirmation of what they were already seeking beneath the Temple Mount. The brothers told them of survivors who fled both westward and eastward, carrying maps of constellations, tablets inscribed with codes, and powders capable of awakening hidden faculties in the human mind. These remnants were scattered deliberately, concealed in sacred sites across the world, waiting for the day when guardians would return to retrieve them. Could the Templars have believed themselves chosen to continue that guardianship, to recover the fragments and shield them from the unworthy? If so, their mission was not merely excavation, but inheritance. They were no longer only knights of Christ, but heirs to a task that transcended religion, charged with protecting a wisdom that could destabilize both crowns and altars. The brothers of the East may have told them that mana, the shimmering white substance, was not legend, but reality, created through alchemical refinement of gold into a state that defied ordinary matter. This powder, luminous and subtle, was said to expand consciousness, extend life, and align the human body with universal energy. Such a claim would have been heresy to the church, yet irresistible to men who had spent years laboring in tunnels beneath the most sacred ground in Jerusalem. The Templars' secrecy deepened after these encounters. Their rituals grew more enigmatic, their symbols more cryptic, as though they had absorbed teachings they could not openly declare. The cross upon their banners remained, but its meaning may have shifted, becoming less a symbol of faith alone and more a cipher of balance, union, and hidden geometry. Their chapels echoed with chants structured like codes, their cathedrals aligned with solstices and stars, as though each stone were a message preserved in architecture rather than parchment. Did these designs emerge from the wisdom of the brothers or from relics unearthed in Jerusalem itself? The paradox grows deeper. How could knights sworn to Christian obedience harbor teachings that contradicted the very church they served? Perhaps they believed the contradiction was only apparent, that truth was larger than creed, that faith itself was but a veil over deeper memory. Or perhaps they knew that to reveal what they had learned would invite destruction, and that survival demanded silence. And so they hid the fragments within symbols, codes, and stone. Legends of the Brothers of the East persisted long after the Templars were destroyed. Some linked them to the Sufis, mystics who guarded secrets of vibration and breath. Others connect them to Nestorian Christians traveling eastward, carrying texts rejected by Rome. A few even identify them with hidden sects in Persia, keepers of Zoroastrian fire temples who preserved fragments of Atlantean cosmology. Each theory remains uncertain, yet all point to the same conclusion. The Templars were not alone in their search, but part of a network of silent custodians stretching across continents. If this is true, then the fall of the Templars in 1307 was not an end, but a scattering. The knowledge entrusted to them may have passed into other hands, resurfacing later in the Freemasons, the Rosicrucians, or even in secretive orders still unnamed. The Brothers of the East vanish from record, yet their echo lingers like a faint chord resonating beneath centuries of noise. Perhaps they never disappeared at all, but remain concealed, waiting, as they always have, for those willing to listen. And so the mystery deepens. Were the Templars merely soldiers of Christendom, or were they apprentices of a lineage that stretched back to Atlantis itself? If they truly received teachings from the Brothers of the East, then their mission was not invention, but recovery. Not heresy, but continuity. And if that continuity still flows unseen, then history as we know it is only the surface of a much older current, one that continues to move in silence beneath the noise of empires. Powder of light, spoken of in hushed tones and cloaked in allegory, emerges again and again in the fragments of Atlantean memory. And within the whispers surrounding the Templars, it takes on a startling solidity. Some called it mana, shimmering and pale, a fine white substance described as more precious than gold. Though it was made from gold itself, transmuted through alchemy into a form that defied ordinary matter. To those who encountered its legend, it was not merely a relic, but a force, a catalyst that unlocked hidden capacities within the human frame, a bridge between flesh and spirit. Could this have been the true treasure the Templars guarded, the secret that drew them beneath the Temple Mount and into silence for nearly a decade? Descriptions of the powder read like a mixture of miracle and science. It was said to heal wounds swiftly, restore failing strength, and lengthen the span of life far beyond what nature allowed. Some accounts claim it opened vision into unseen dimensions, stirring dreams so vivid they crossed into waking life. Others insist it heightened awareness, sharpening thought, memory, and perception until the mind itself seemed to transcend its limits. There were even whispers that it altered the body's weight, allowing levitation, or cloaked the form in a field of energy impervious to harm. These stories, incredible as they sound, repeat across cultures, from Egyptian texts that speak of divine bread offered to pharaohs, to Mesopotamian myths of gods consuming celestial food, to esoteric traditions preserving recipes of golden powder as the sustenance of immortals. If the Templars did indeed uncover such a substance, their silence becomes entirely comprehensible, for no church could sanction its existence. To admit that powder could open the third eye, extend life, and offer communion without priests or sacraments would collapse the very structure of medieval faith. The Church's authority rested on the belief that salvation flowed ritual and obedience, but mana promised access without intermediary, a direct bridge to the divine, a liberation too threatening for papal power to allow. Thus, the powder, if real, could never be spoken of, only guarded in secrecy, perhaps consumed in shadowed rituals, perhaps hidden in chests that later vanished into the sea. Modern whispers identify this powder with monatomic gold, a form of matter rediscovered by alchemists and fringe scientists, where atoms exist not bound together in metal, but as separate shimmering particles. This substance, described in recent times as capable of influencing cellular regeneration, boosting cognition, and altering consciousness, aligns uncannily with the ancient descriptions of mana. Could it be that what modern science calls anomaly was once the daily bread of kings, priests, and survivors of Atlantis? If so, then the Templars, through excavation and inheritance, may have held in their hands the very link between myth and reality. The symbolism of powder runs deep in their legacy. In certain surviving manuscripts attributed to the order, cryptic references appear to bread of light, dust of stars, and the hidden manna. In cathedral iconography, chalices are sometimes depicted not brimming with liquid, but with radiant particles drawn as tiny spheres of gold or silver. Could this imagery conceal the truth that the Grail itself was not a cup, but a vessel for this powder, a container for the substance believed to unlock divinity within man? The possibility is chilling, for it suggests that the legends of relics sought by knights were not symbolic at all, but literal. And yet, silence prevails. No artifact of mana survives in public record. No sample rests in any museum. If it was found, it was hidden, perhaps consumed, perhaps carried westward on ships that vanished from La Rochelle in the wake of their persecution. But absence is not proof of non-existence. Absence itself may be evidence of deliberate erasure, for the powder was too dangerous to reveal. If kings feared it, if popes condemned it, then perhaps the Templars buried it again, entrusting it only to coded rituals and symbols carved into stone. The paradox remains. Knights sworn to poverty may have possessed the most coveted substance of all time, a powder that promised wealth beyond gold, power beyond swords, wisdom beyond scripture, and yet they revealed nothing, not in trial, not in torture, not in death. What does such silence suggest, if not that they believed the powder was too sacred to betray, too perilous to release into the hands of their enemies. The secrecy itself is testimony. What if the shimmering powder was not myth, but matter? What if its very existence explains why the Templars endured suspicion, why their order rose so quickly, why their end came so violently? Could it be that mana was the true core of their hidden mission? The treasure of Atlantis they sought to recover, the inheritance humanity was never meant to reclaim? And if fragments of it remain hidden still, what would it mean for our own time, when science once again begins to glimpse what the ancients already knew? In the end, the powder of light remains suspended between legend and silence, a substance erased from chronicles, yet whispered of in every age. Whether it lay beneath Solomon's temple, whether the Templars consumed it in secret, whether it waits still in vaults beneath cathedrals or in chambers sealed by stone, remains a question history dares not answer. But in its absence, the paradox grows only sharper, like a glimmer seen at the corner of the eye, gone when turned toward, yet hauntingly persistent. The divided arc emerges as one of the most unsettling claims tied to the Templars, for it challenges not only the memory of Israel, but the very idea of singularity in sacred relics. Tradition speaks of the Ark of the Covenant as one object, a golden chest built to hold the tablets of Moses, carried before armies, radiating divine power, guarded within the Holy of Holies. Yet whispers surrounding the Templars suggest something more complex, that the Ark was never singular, but a system. Multiple devices lay hidden in separate chambers beneath Solomon's temple, each with a distinct purpose, each attuned to forces beyond the comprehension of medieval men. Accounts speak of 6 arcs, though whether they were duplicates, fragments, or variations of a single principle remains uncertain. Some were said to resonate with sound, producing tones that could shake stone or heal flesh. Others emitted light, not flame or torch, but radiant energy glowing in the darkness of sealed chambers. Still others were rumored to act as weapons, focusing energy into destructive force, or as tools of communion, bridging man and the divine through resonance rather than prayer. Such descriptions, however outlandish, align with stories of ancient devices scattered across myth, the speaking stones of Celtic lore, the luminous tablets of Egypt, the thunder weapons of Vedic hymns. Could it be that all these myths reflect the same inheritance, distributed across cultures yet preserved most fully beneath Solomon's temple? The Templars' supposed discovery of multiple arcs redefines their 9 years of silence. No longer was it the search for one lost relic, but the recovery of a system, a network of artifacts designed to function together. If Atlantis had truly mastered the manipulation of sound, light, and vibration, then perhaps these devices were fragments of its legacy, preserved in Jerusalem as though awaiting rediscovery. Imagine the implications for knights trained not in science but in obedience, stumbling upon relics that glowed, resonated, and hummed with power beyond any crucifix or relic of bone. Would they not be transformed? Their mission forever altered. Their silence deepened into necessity. Enemies of the Templars later accused them of worshiping strange idols, of venerating a head said to speak, of bowing before objects unseen. Historians dismiss these accusations as the products of torture. But what if they were distortions of truth? What if the idol was a fragment of an arc, an object that responded to sound, emitting resonance mistaken for speech? What if the rituals described in inquisitorial records were echoes of experiments with devices beyond comprehension? To the Church, such acts could only be heresy. To the Templars, they may have been acts of preservation, attempts to safeguard and perhaps reactivate knowledge already slipping from memory. In cathedral architecture, faint traces of this divided arc appear encoded. Rose windows constructed with concentric circles mirror descriptions of energy radiating outward. Floor labyrinths spiral inward, as though tracing sound waves converging on a point. Even the arrangement of columns in certain Templar chapels seems to echo harmonic ratios, as if stone itself were shaped to embody the principles of resonance hidden within the relics. Could these cathedrals have been designed not merely as houses of worship, but as diagrams, symbolic blueprints preserving knowledge of devices too dangerous to keep in open sight? The paradox is profound. The most sacred relic of Israel, long sought by prophets and kings, may have been not a single chest, but a system of Atlantean devices disguised as biblical treasure. And if the Templars found them, they inherited not only a fragment of Israel's memory, but a doorway into a drowned world of science. To reveal such a discovery would have shattered both Judaism and Christianity, for the Ark would no longer be proof of covenant alone, but evidence of a technology older than Scripture itself. Why then was history so determined to erase this possibility? Perhaps because to admit the Ark divided is to admit the past itself divided, fractured between what we are told to remember and what we are forced to forget. If relics existed that could bend sound, channel light, and bridge the human and the divine, then faith as authority collapses, leaving only truth, unmediated, uncontrollable. The Templars' silence becomes clearer in this light. They were not traitors to Christendom, but custodians of a revelation too devastating to reveal. And so the Ark divided remains in shadow, not disproven but unacknowledged, a memory erased yet persistent, like a half-heard echo in a vaulted hall. Was it real? A system of devices unearthed and hidden away, or only rumor born of fear? The question lingers unresolved, yet its very persistence suggests that the silence surrounding the Templars conceals more than the failure of knights. It conceals the survival of Atlantis itself, encoded in relics locked beneath stone. A grail reimagined unsettles the very core of medieval devotion. For the cup that countless legends portray as the vessel of Christ's blood may have been something altogether different, something aligned not with ceremony, but with energy, not with wine, but with light. In most retellings, the Grail is pictured as a chalice lifted at the Last Supper, sanctified by sacred memory, pursued by kings, poets, and seekers of purity. Yet within the whispers surrounding the Templars, the Grail emerges not as a simple vessel, but as a device, an instrument designed to channel power, to heal the body, expand the mind, and bridge the human soul with forces unseen. Those who encountered fragments of the rumor spoke of a container that glowed not with liquid, but with radiance, a cup whose emptiness was its purpose, for it received the powder of light, the manna said to descend from Atlantis. In this telling, the Grail was not a relic of Christ, but a tool of continuity, a vessel designed to hold the very substance that unlocked human potential. To drink from it was to consume not wine, but transformation. To partake was not to join in ritual, but in resonance. Could it be that when the Templars sought the Grail, they sought not a symbol of faith, but a technology disguised as devotion? The Church, in its sermons, spoke of salvation through sacraments, grace bestowed through priest and altar. But the Grail, as reimagined in secret, offered direct access. Healing without priest, vision without ritual, communion without church. To admit such a possibility would dismantle the very structure of authority. For if the Grail could deliver inner illumination, what role remained for pope or crown? The paradox is stark. The relic most revered by Christendom may have threatened the very institutions that revered it, if its true nature were known. Across cultures, echoes of the Grail appear in curious forms. In Egypt, the so-called bread of the gods was consumed in vessels depicted as radiant bowls. In Mesopotamia, tales speak of a container of sacred drink reserved for kings and priests, granting wisdom and longevity. In Celtic lore, the cauldron of rebirth revives the dead, endless in sustenance. Each of these myths may be refracted memories of the same principle, a vessel designed not for ordinary food or drink, but for the shimmering powder of transformation. The Templars, inheritors of whispers, may have recognized in these parallels the same truth, that the Grail was not singular to Christ, but part of a far older continuum. Architecture again carries the echo. In certain Templar chapels, chalices are carved into capitals, yet their form is abstract, geometric, their bowls adorned with patterns of radiating lines. Stained glass windows depict cups not filled with liquid but surrounded by rays of light, as though the object's essence was luminosity itself. These designs, dismissed as artistic flourish, may conceal the order's true understanding. The Grail was not an earthly cup, but a key to resonance, a container for mana, a focus of Atlantean science hidden within Christian myth. Enemies accused the Knights of heresy, of distorting the image of Christ, of substituting their own rituals for holy sacraments. Perhaps these charges were not entirely false. If they had indeed uncovered or inherited a reimagined Grail, then their secret rites may have included its use, though in forms so alien to inquisitors that they were branded idolatry, drinking from a vessel of light, consuming powder that opened vision, chanting in harmonic patterns to activate resonance. Such acts would have appeared blasphemous to those bound by rigid creed. Yet to the Templars, they may have been the truest worship, communion not with church, but with creation itself. Why then has the Grail legend endured so powerfully through centuries of retelling? Perhaps because it encodes a truth that cannot be entirely erased. The story of a vessel that grants eternal life, wisdom, or divine connection resonates too deeply to be dismissed. It is as though memory itself insists on preserving the outline, even if the substance is concealed. And within that outline, the Templars appear as custodians, guardians of a Grail not of silver, but of light. Not of Christ alone, but of Atlantis. The paradox becomes unbearable. The holiest relic of Christendom may have been born not in the upper room of Jerusalem, but in the laboratories of a drowned civilization. To believe this is to accept that faith itself was built upon a vessel older than Scripture, that the Grail was not fulfillment, but survival, not prophecy, but inheritance. Such a revelation could never be spoken aloud. Thus, the Grail became story, poem, allegory, safe to repeat, impossible to prove, yet forever carrying the shadow of its forbidden truth. The Grail reimagined remains hidden in legend, sought by knights, poets, and kings, but understood perhaps only by those who inherited its secret meaning. Was it ever found, or was it always a symbol? Was it carried westward on ships that vanished, or concealed within stone vaults still sealed beneath cathedrals? The silence does not answer. Yet in that silence, the question persists, sharper with each retelling. What was the Grail? A cup, a code, or a catalyst? And why did the Templars guard its image with such unyielding secrecy? Emerald script, a phrase that echoes like an incantation, draws us into one of the strangest threads woven through the tapestry of Templar secrecy. For among the relics rumored to have passed into their custody was not a chalice or chest, but a tablet, flat, green, and inscribed with characters unlike any script of Europe. It was called the Emerald Tablet, and those who dared to describe it spoke of writing that did not remain constant, but seemed to shift with the reader, as though the stone itself translated its meaning directly into the mind. What alphabet can alter itself to the perception of the beholder, unless it is more than an alphabet, unless it is a language of resonance, a code inscribed not merely in stone, but in consciousness? Legends trace the tablet back to Hermes Trismegistus, the mythical father of alchemy. Yet some whispers insist the knowledge predated Greece, Egypt, even Mesopotamia, reaching into the drowned world of Atlantis. The lines said to be inscribed upon it, cryptic phrases about the unity of above and below, the harmony of spirit and matter, are fragments of a cosmology that sees creation as vibration, not decree. To medieval theologians, such ideas would have been heresy. To the Templars, already immersed in secrets that defied doctrine, the tablet may have been revelation. If they uncovered it beneath the Temple Mount, or inherited it from the Brothers of the East, then they possessed not only a relic but also instruction, a codex for reawakening the very sciences whispered to have sustained Atlantis. What purpose did such a tablet serve? Descriptions vary. Some call it a manual of transmutation, a guide to refining metals into shimmering powders like manna, the substance of light. Others claim it explained the unity of sound, light, and thought, teaching how to shape matter with intention. Still others insist it was a key to energy systems long forgotten, a set of principles for drawing power from earth and sky. Whatever its content, it was more than philosophy. The words themselves, etched in green stone, were said to radiate force, to stir the air, to hum faintly when exposed to light. Could such tales be exaggerations, or are they hints of a technology that fuses text and tool, symbol and machine? The paradox deepens when considering the accusations leveled against the Templars in their trials. They were said to venerate a mysterious head, to bow before idols that spoke, to guard secret books filled with strange symbols. Historians dismiss these as fabrications under torture, yet the image of a speaking object, of texts filled with forbidden characters, aligns curiously with descriptions of the Emerald Tablet. Could the idol have been not a false god, but a device, a tablet whose writing seemed alive, mistaken by inquisitors for sorcery? If so, the charges of heresy were not inventions, but distorted reflections of something real, something dangerous, because it threatened to reveal knowledge too vast for medieval power to contain. Architecture again bears silent witness. In Rosslyn Chapel, often linked to surviving Templar traditions, carvings depict plants unknown in Europe at the time, as though drawn from knowledge carried across oceans. Among the intricate stonework are patterns resembling alchemical symbols, circles intersecting in harmonic ratios, stars interlaced with geometric grids. Could these carvings encode fragments of the Emerald Tablet? Transcribed not on parchment but in stone, preserved in a language the Church could not erase. Cathedrals across Europe, with their labyrinth floors and stained glass geometries, may conceal the same inheritance. Symbols repeat as if to ensure the memory would outlast persecution. Why would knights guard such a tablet with their lives? Because its message promised liberation. It declared that divinity is not distant but within, that heaven and earth mirror one another, that transformation is not the monopoly of priesthood, but the right of all who understand. Such teachings, if revealed, would dismantle the structure of medieval control, for they erase the gap between man and God, placing power directly in human hands. The Emerald Tablet was more than an artifact. It was rebellion in stone, a threat to every throne and altar, for it proclaimed that knowledge itself is the sacred path. If the Templars did preserve the Emerald Tablet, what became of it after their fall? Some say it was smuggled to Scotland, hidden with relics carried by surviving knights. Others believe it was taken to Portugal, concealed within the Order of Christ that rose from the Templar ashes. A few claim it never left Jerusalem, sealed once more beneath the stones of the mount, waiting for another order, another age to find it. Its absence is haunting, for like the Grail and the Ark, it remains both everywhere and nowhere, present in legend, yet absent in proof. And so the Emerald script lingers in silence, a code not lost but hidden, woven into the very fabric of myths, alchemical texts, and architectural patterns that still whisper across centuries. Was it truly Atlantean in origin, or was it a medieval invention cloaked in antiquity? The question cannot be answered, but its persistence is itself a form of testimony. For memory, once awakened, does not die. It merely disguises itself, waiting to be recognized by those who know how to look. The spear's secret carries with it an aura of both reverence and dread, for in Christian legend it is remembered as the weapon that pierced the side of Christ. Yet, in the darker whispers surrounding the Templars, it becomes something far older, a relic not born at Golgotha, but preserved across ages as a tool of power, called the Spear of Destiny. Its legend insists that whosoever holds it commands the fate of nations. Yet, some accounts entwined with Templar secrecy suggest that its true potency lay not in iron alone, but in its connection with the shimmering powder of light. Without mana, the spear was but a relic of metal. With it, the spear awakened, becoming an instrument of perception, protection, and perhaps even dominion over the hidden energies that course through earth and flesh alike. Accounts describe the spear as more than a weapon. It was said to sharpen intuition, to grant clarity of decision, to protect its bearer from unseen threats. Some believed it could tip the balance of battles, not by cutting down armies, but by revealing their weakness, by stirring fear in the unworthy and courage in the chosen. Others whispered that it allowed its wielder to sense the currents of destiny, to align action with forces beyond comprehension. Such claims blur the line between magic and technology, yet they echo the same principles found in other artifacts: resonance, vibration, harmony between human and universal energy. Was the spear then a fragment of Atlantean science reshaped by later memory into Christian legend, preserved not for veneration but for utility? The paradox intensifies when examining how the Templars were accused of worshipping strange relics. For among the charges leveled at them were references to hidden weapons, to objects guarded with secrecy beyond measure. Could these accusations have been distorted glimpses of the spear, misunderstood by inquisitors who saw only blasphemy where the knights guarded a deeper inheritance? If so, then the spear was not an idol, but a device, a relic they dared not reveal. For to admit its existence would have drawn the wrath of both church and crown. Legends from other cultures support this suspicion. In the Vedic hymns, weapons called Vajra are described as thunderbolts of energy wielded not by mortals but by gods, yet always dependent upon purity of mind. In Celtic tradition, spears of light carried by heroes blaze with unearthly fire, requiring discipline to command. Even in Mesopotamian myth, divine weapons are described as tools of destiny, shaping victory and defeat, not through brute force, but through alignment with cosmic law. Could all these stories be refracted memories of the same principle, embodied most famously in the Spear of Destiny? The Templars' interest in the spear may have been less about conquest and more about preservation, for such an artifact in unworthy hands could corrupt as easily as empower. The legends insist that the spear demanded purity, that it would betray or destroy those who wielded it selfishly. Perhaps this condition was not mystical but mechanical, dependent upon resonance between user and device, requiring harmony of intention to activate. In this light, the trials of the Templars take on darker meaning, for if inquisitors sought to wrest the relics from them, then the order's silence may have been an act of protection, ensuring the artifacts never fell into hands unable to bear them. Architecture, again, whispers the spear's presence. In some Templar chapels, reliefs depict lances adorned with rays, as though emitting not blood, but light. In illuminated manuscripts, knights are shown carrying spears tipped with flames, images dismissed as allegory, but perhaps encoding knowledge of the artifact they guarded. Even the alignment of certain Templar commanderies with geomantic lines across Europe may reflect the spear's symbolism, a mapping of power across Earth's body, echoing the lance that channels energy from point to ground. Why does the spear endure so strongly in legend? Because it embodies the paradox of power itself, the possibility that destiny can be wielded by man, yet only at great cost. To hold the spear is to stand at the threshold of godhood and ruin, to touch forces too vast for human grasp, and if the Templars truly possessed it, even for a moment, then their order's rise and fall becomes clearer. They ascended swiftly, feared by kings, envied by popes, and whispered about by common folk. Their fall was equally swift, as though the world itself could not allow such custodianship to endure. The spear's secret remains hidden, its current resting place unknown. Some claim it lies in Vienna, preserved in imperial treasuries. Others insist it vanished with Templar fleets carried across oceans to lands uncharted. Still others believe it remains buried where it was first hidden, deep beneath Jerusalem, awaiting discovery by those bold or foolish enough to seek it. Yet its story persists, as though the memory of such an artifact refuses erasure, a reminder that power once held may yet return. And so the spear stands in shadow, half weapon, half key, suspended between history and myth. Was it truly the lance of Christ, or a fragment of Atlantis, reborn in legend? Did the Templars wield it, or merely guard it, fearing what it could unleash? The silence of their order leaves only questions. Yet in those questions lingers the unsettling thought that destiny itself might once have been grasped by human hands. And perhaps again, hidden texts form another layer of the Templars' enigma. For alongside relics of light and devices of resonance, there are whispers of manuscripts unearthed beneath the Temple Mount. Scrolls that told stories forbidden to surface, writings that contradicted the official gospel and offered a vision of the divine far more intimate than the church allowed. If relics could be concealed in stone, then words too could be sealed, waiting for the day they might be read by those prepared to receive them. According to scattered accounts, these writings describe not a distant God enthroned in judgment, but a source of light dwelling within every soul, accessible not through ritual, but through awakening. Some claim the texts were linked to the Gnostic tradition, those suppressed writings that portrayed Christ not as savior through sacrifice, but as a teacher of hidden knowledge. Others insist they resembled fragments of Hermetic lore, teaching that the cosmos itself is mirrored within man, that to know oneself is to touch the eternal. Still others connect them with the Dead Sea Scrolls, written in desert caves that spoke of secret covenants, rival messiahs, and truths buried under layers of fear. If the Templars indeed uncovered such manuscripts, then they held in their hands not only a threat to the Church's authority, but a map to an older lineage of wisdom, one perhaps stretching back to Atlantis itself. The paradox is stark. Knights sworn to defend Christendom may have been guardians of teachings that reshaped the image of Christ beyond recognition. To the Church, these scrolls would have been poison, for they undermined obedience, erased hierarchy, and suggested that salvation was not mediated by priest or pope, but awakened within. To the Templars who already labored in silence, such texts may have confirmed the whispers of the Brothers of the East and the relics they had unearthed, that humanity once possessed knowledge of light, sound, and spirit, a knowledge drowned but not destroyed. In inquisitorial records, accusations against the order often included claims that they denied Christ, spat upon the cross, or worshipped strange figures. Historians dismiss these as confessions tortured into being, yet one wonders if behind distortion lay a kernel of truth. Perhaps the Templars did not deny Christ, but embraced a different vision of him, one taught in the hidden texts. Christ as revealer of inner light, companion of Mary Magdalene, disciple of John, inheritor of Atlantean science disguised in parable. To speak such ideas aloud in the 12th century would have meant death. To keep them in silence was survival. Traces of these teachings seep into the symbolism of Templar sites. Edinburgh chapels display carvings of twin figures, male and female, standing together as if in union, suggesting a sacred partnership, erased from Orthodox scripture. Labyrinths inscribed upon cathedral floors may have symbolized the path inward, not the pilgrimage outward. Even the double-headed eagle, later emblem of secret orders, may echo the dual vision of heaven and earth united, as described in suppressed scrolls. Such imagery, dismissed as ornament, may encode fragments of the hidden texts, preserved in stone so that memory would outlast persecution. The implications are unsettling. If the Templars truly preserved these writings, then their fall was not merely about wealth or politics, but about the suppression of knowledge. Kings may have coveted their treasure, but popes feared their truth. For a church built upon authority cannot survive texts that tell every man he is already divine, every woman already a vessel of light, every human being already a temple of the eternal. Such a revelation would unseat thrones, topple cathedrals, and render hierarchy obsolete. What became of these manuscripts remains unknown. Some believe they were smuggled out of Jerusalem, carried in secrecy to France or Scotland, hidden within commanderies that later fell silent. Others claim they were transported westward on the vanished fleet, sealed in chests that sailed into legend. A few insist they were copied in fragments, encoded into alchemical texts and hermetic treatises that later appeared in Europe under mysterious authorship. Wherever they went, their words left shadows, whispers in myth and symbol that refuse to die. The paradox persists. A military order sworn to obedience may have been the most dangerous library of its age. For relics can be locked away, but words once read cannot be forgotten. The silence of the Templars, their refusal to confess even under fire, suggests they knew the weight of what they guarded. To reveal it would be to unleash a storm too vast for their world. To conceal it was to protect both themselves and the knowledge itself, preserving it for an age perhaps yet to come. And so the hidden texts linger at the edges of memory, their words unread, yet their influence woven into the fabric of myth, heresy, and rumor. Were they true? Were they inventions of later imagination? Or were they fragments of a drowned wisdom carried across flood and fire, concealed beneath Jerusalem and entrusted for a brief time to knights whose silence has outlasted their order? The question remains unanswered. Yet it is in the unanswered that the deepest truths often hide. Dangerous revelations are often buried, not because they are false, but because they threaten the scaffolding upon which power is built. And within the hidden texts attributed to the Templars were ideas so corrosive to the medieval order that silence became the only possible shield. Among the most unsettling of these writings were passages that presented salvation not as obedience to ritual nor submission to hierarchy, but as discovery of an inner light that could not be mediated by priest or pope. Such words were dynamite in an age where the church claimed authority as sole guardian of truth. For they suggested that every man and woman, peasant and noble alike, carried within them the same spark of divinity that bishops and kings claimed as their own. The scrolls, if they existed, painted a picture of Christ, not as distant, sovereign, enthroned in majesty, but as a teacher of hidden wisdom, one who pointed beyond himself to the light within. They hinted at relationships carefully excised from canonical gospels, suggesting a bond with Mary Magdalene far deeper than friendship, a vision of sacred union that elevated the feminine as equal to the masculine in the divine order. Other passages placed John the Baptist in the role of first keeper of secret knowledge, a custodian whose teachings were altered, reshaped, and diminished as they passed into hands less willing to preserve their dangerous implications. To read such words in the 12th century was to glimpse a world where authority lost its chains, where the divine was democratized, and where the line between heresy and revelation blurred beyond recognition. The paradox here is piercing. Knights sworn to serve Christendom may have been carrying texts that redefined it, custodians of a vision where the church itself was rendered unnecessary. If humanity could access divinity directly, if knowledge was the true path to salvation, then what need remained for intermediaries, rituals, tithes, or decrees? The very existence of such ideas threatened to collapse the edifice of medieval faith, and thus the silence of the Templars becomes less puzzling and more inevitable. They were bound to secrecy not only by vow but by necessity, for to reveal their treasure was to invite annihilation. When their order was finally attacked, the accusations leveled against them included bizarre charges, spitting upon the cross, denying Christ, worshiping idols. Historians explain these as lies forced under torture. Yet behind distortion often lies a shadow of truth. Perhaps the Templars did reject the church's image of Christ, not out of hatred, but out of conviction that it was incomplete. Perhaps they revered not idols, but relics that embodied principles the church feared. To those who did not understand, their silence looked like heresy. To those who understood too well, it was preservation. Evidence of these dangerous revelations lingers in the architecture the Templars left behind. Rosslyn Chapel in Scotland, often linked to surviving traditions, is filled with carvings of vines and plants unknown in medieval Europe, as though knowledge of distant lands had been encoded in stone centuries before explorers set sail. Labyrinth patterns on cathedral floors suggest not journeys outward, but paths inward, spirals leading to the center of the self, rather than to distant shrines. Even the careful orientation of Templar churches towards celestial alignments suggests devotion to a cosmology older than doctrine, one that harmonized heaven and earth as the hidden texts described. If the Templars preserved these revelations, then their sudden destruction in 1307 becomes more understandable. Kings feared their wealth, yes, but the church feared their knowledge, for such knowledge could not be controlled. Imagine peasants hearing that salvation was already within them, that rituals were symbols, not necessities. Imagine nobles hearing that power lay not in divine right, but in inner light. Such revelations could spark revolution centuries before Europe was ready. And so, suppression was inevitable. What became of these texts? Some believe they were burned in secret, destroyed by the Templars themselves, rather than risk misuse. Others insist they were carried away on the vanished fleet, hidden in lands beyond the reach of papal power. Still others claim fragments survived in alchemical treatises encoded into cryptic formulas about transmutation and elixirs, disguising spiritual revelation as chemical recipe. Whatever their fate, the silence surrounding them suggests that their danger did not lie in fantasy, but in truth, too potent to be spoken aloud. The paradox remains unresolved. Were the Templars heretics who betrayed their vows, or visionaries who preserved humanity's most radical inheritance? If the scrolls existed, then the answer lies not in labels, but in recognition that truth itself can be perilous. Dangerous revelations are not erased because they are unworthy. They are erased because they are too powerful. And if fragments of those teachings still survive, hidden in symbols, stories, or societies born from the Templars' ashes, then perhaps the silence that has endured for centuries is less a void than a veil, one still guarding secrets the world is not yet prepared to face. The turning tide began when whispers of heresy reached too high. For kings who once clothed the Templars in favor, and popes who once blessed their mission, began to see in them not guardians of Christendom, but rivals to its very authority. By the 13th century, the order had grown into a power unmatched. Its wealth rivaled monarchs. Its fortresses stretched from Portugal to Syria. Its fleet sailed seas that others barely dared to cross. Yet beneath the surface of prosperity flowed currents of unease. Rumors spread that the knights carried secret rituals, that their chapels hid symbols not of Christ, but of older gods, that their silence concealed revelations too dangerous for the faithful to hear. Kings indebted to them whispered against them, clergy envied them, and common folk began to murmur of powers no army should command. The paradox sharpened. The knights were celebrated as warriors of the cross, yet feared as guardians of forbidden truths. Their discipline, once admired, now appeared as aloof secrecy. Their wealth, once praised as a reward for service, now seemed evidence of hidden commerce, mysteries, and relics. Even their courage became suspect, for it was said to spring not from faith, but from knowledge of talismans, powers, and devices unearthed beneath Solomon's temple. Suspicion, once a seed, grew into a harvest that kings and popes could no longer ignore. Among the most vocal was King Philip IV of France, a monarch heavily indebted to the order, whose coffers groaned under loans drawn from Templar treasuries. For him, their wealth was threat enough. Yet it was the rumors of hidden knowledge that ignited fear. If the knights indeed possessed relics of Atlantis, if they had uncovered scrolls that denied the church's monopoly on salvation, then they held not only gold, but power enough to fracture Europe itself. Pope Clement V, once their ally, grew equally uneasy, for whispers reached Rome that the Templars honored idols, kissed forbidden objects, and invoked names unrecorded in Christian liturgy. Whether these charges were truth or distortion scarcely mattered. The atmosphere had shifted, and suspicion became weapon. The Church thrives on certainty, and certainty cannot coexist with silence. The Templars' refusal to explain their guarded rites, their hidden archives, all became proof of guilt in the eyes of inquisitors. A simple paradox sealed their fate. The more they concealed, the more dangerous they appeared. The more dangerous they appeared, the more inevitable their destruction became. And yet, one wonders if their silence was not guilt, but loyalty to something greater, to relics and teachings that could not be betrayed without endangering the world itself. Architecture betrays the tension of this period. Cathedrals raised under Templar patronage grew more elaborate, their windows filled with coded geometries, their floors carved with spirals that seemed to lead inward rather than outward. Was this defiance, or was it farewell, an attempt to inscribe in stone what could no longer be spoken? Each chapel becomes a confession, each tower a cipher, each pattern a testimony, left for eyes centuries later to decipher. Kings saw only stone, but perhaps those stones concealed the final words of an order preparing for its fall. The tide of suspicion did not turn overnight, but its current was inexorable. By the early 1300s, the Templars were no longer untouchable. France sought their wealth, Rome feared their knowledge, and even the common faithful began to see shadows where once they saw saints. The charge of heresy, once unthinkable, now spread like smoke. Knights once saluted in honor now found themselves whispered about as sorcerers, alchemists, idolaters, and in that whispering lay a truth deeper than accusation. The order had touched something too profound to fit within the narrow frame of medieval faith. If their discoveries had been trivial, they could have been explained. If their rituals had been empty, they could have been excused. But their silence, unyielding even under rumor, suggests they guarded treasures of memory too vast for compromise. It was this silence, more than wealth or pride, that made them intolerable. For silence conceals, and what is concealed breeds fear. And fear, when married to envy and debt, births destruction. Thus, the turning tide did not mark their failure, but their success. The very fact that they became feared proves that they held something worth fearing. Whether relics, scrolls, or fragments of Atlantis itself, what they guarded was powerful enough to unsettle kings and threaten popes. The paradox is cruel. The more faithfully they guarded their mission, the more certain their doom became. And so, as suspicion hardened into decree, the Templars stood at the edge of annihilation, not for what they had done, but for what they refused to reveal. Their silence was their shield, but also their sentence. The tide had turned, and history itself prepared to drown them. Friday the 13th dawned like any other. Yet before the sun had lifted over Paris, the silence surrounding the Templars was torn apart by force. On that October morning in 1307, orders carried from king to sheriff, from pope to priest, unleashed the collapse of the most powerful brotherhood in Christendom. At dawn, knights were seized in their commanderies, dragged from their beds, chained in cloisters where once they had prayed, and accused not of failure on the battlefield, but of crimes whispered in darkness: heresy, sorcery, idol worship, blasphemy against the very faith they had sworn to defend. To the common ear, these accusations were shocking. Yet to the rulers who crafted them, they were convenient masks concealing motives of debt, envy, and fear. King Philip IV of France, his coffers drained and his throne threatened, sought release from the debts owed to the order. Pope Clement V, bound in uneasy alliance with the crown, feared the whispers of Templar secrets that undermined the Church's claim to exclusive authority. Together they struck in silence, choosing a day that would echo across centuries. But what if the charges themselves, though twisted, contained distorted shadows of truth? What if the accusations of idol worship reflected relics too dangerous to name, artifacts that could not be confessed without collapsing the world's fragile balance of power under torture? Knights confessed to obscene rituals, spitting on crosses, kissing strange heads, invoking forbidden names. Historians dismiss these as lies torn from broken bodies. Yet the consistency of the imagery is haunting. Again and again, the figure of a head appears, sometimes bearded, sometimes speaking, sometimes radiating light. Was this the Baphomet so often caricatured? Or was it a fragment of an Atlantean relic? Perhaps one of the divided arcs or the emerald tablet, misinterpreted by inquisitors as sorcery in the medieval mind. Technology unknown must always appear demonic. What if the Templars' supposed idol was in fact a device that resonated with voice, a relic too strange to explain, too powerful to surrender? The paradox deepens. The Templars were condemned for heresy, yet their supposed crimes mirror too closely the very artifacts they were rumored to guard. The Grail reimagined as an energy vessel, the Ark divided into instruments of sound and light, the tablet that spoke in shifting script, all could be misread as blasphemous objects. All could give rise to the charges hurled against them. Perhaps the Inquisitors did not invent these images, but saw reflections distorted by ignorance. Fragments of truth appeared through the haze of fear. The trials became theaters of cruelty. Inquisition halls echoed with screams. Parchments filled with confessions were signed by hands broken in irons. Yet amid the agony, silence endured. Some knights admitted everything, only to retract once freed from torture, insisting they had lied merely to end their pain. Others remained steadfast, refusing to betray their secrets, even at the stake. Their endurance suggests that what they concealed was more than pride. For gold, one may betray. For titles, one may falter. But for knowledge deemed too sacred to expose, even fire could be faced in silence. On that October day, the order itself was broken, yet not erased. For even as knights were imprisoned, whispers claimed that their greatest treasures, gold, relics, scrolls, perhaps even the powder of light, had already vanished. At La Rochelle, the fleet that once carried their banners slipped silently from the harbor, vanishing into the mist, its destination unknown. Did it sail to Scotland, where sympathetic lords offered refuge? Did it cross to Portugal, where a new order soon rose, bearing the same red cross under a different name? Or did it sail westward into uncharted seas, carrying with it fragments of Atlantis, destined never to return? The absence of the fleet is itself testimony. History records its departure, yet never its arrival. And so Friday the 13th became not merely the day of their arrest, but a threshold in memory, a symbol of the day power declared war on silence. The date still carries omen, not because of superstition, but because it marks the moment when a veil was torn, when suspicion hardened into persecution, and when truths too vast for the medieval world were forced again into shadow. The paradox persists. The Templars were crushed, yet their silence endured. Kings died, popes faltered, but the order's secrets were never revealed. Torture could not unearth them, fire could not consume them, and history could not erase them. Instead, they slipped into rumor, into legend, into the bloodstream of secret societies that rose in their ashes. What was destroyed on that October morning may have been the order's name, but what survived was its mission, hidden deeper than any dungeon, carried forward in silence that still whispers today. Friday the 13th is remembered as the day of betrayal, but perhaps it was also the day of concealment, when the guardians of forbidden knowledge vanished from the stage of history yet remained alive in its shadows. What they protected, what they refused to confess, and what they carried into exile remains unknown. Yet the very ferocity of their persecution suggests that their silence hid more than heresy. It hid the memory of a drowned world, the inheritance of Atlantis itself. The Curse of Fire was the final act in the Templars' tragedy, a scene etched into memory not only for its cruelty, but for the strange shadow it cast upon those who orchestrated it. On March 18th, 1314, Jacques de Molay, the last Grand Master of the Order, was led in chains to an island on the Seine where a pyre had been built to erase him from the earth. He had endured years of imprisonment, interrogation, and humiliation. Yet when he stood before the flames, he displayed no fear, only a calm that unsettled even his enemies. Before the fire was lit, he lifted his voice and pronounced words that would echo far beyond. That night, he summoned King Philip IV of France and Pope Clement V, his chief persecutors, to stand before the judgment of God within a year. Such a curse might have been dismissed as defiance, the last cry of a condemned man. Yet history records the uncanny fulfillment. Within a month, Pope Clement was dead, struck by illness that spread swiftly and left no time for repentance. By year's end, Philip himself was gone, felled not by age or battle, but by sudden death. The coincidence was too sharp for contemporaries to ignore, and whispers spread that de Molay had spoken with the authority of powers beyond the church, powers perhaps awakened by the very relics the Templars had guarded. To many, it seemed as though the fire had not consumed him, but transformed him, carrying his voice into eternity. The paradox is striking. An order condemned as heretical and corrupt ended with a moment of vindication, a spectacle in which persecutors fell while the condemned seemed triumphant. Was de Molay merely invoking divine justice, or was his curse tied to the forbidden knowledge the Templars had unearthed? Some legends claim that he spoke not only as a man, but as a vessel, that relics of resonance and the powder of light had altered him, granting him sight beyond death. His composure at the stake, his prophecy fulfilled, suggested to many that the Templars had touched truths the church had sought to bury. What if the curse was more than words? Could it have been an act of resonance, a final invocation of energies preserved through Atlantean fragments? If the Templars had indeed guarded relics that responded to voice, vibration, and intention, then de Molay's last declaration may not have been a curse, but an activation, a final harmonization that carried his will into reality. To his captors, it was blasphemy. To his brothers, it was proof that their mission was not ended, but transformed. Accounts from that night speak of silence among the crowd, of onlookers struck with unease, as though they had witnessed not merely an execution, but the opening of a veil. Some described the flames burning with unnatural steadiness, as though shielding rather than consuming. Others swore that his face remained calm even as fire devoured him, his eyes fixed upon something unseen. Whether exaggeration or memory, the image persists. A night consumed by fire, yet unbroken. His voice outlasted his flesh. His enemies fell as though tethered to his words. The curse of fire reverberated beyond France. Across Europe, whispers spread that the Templars had been unjustly destroyed, that their knowledge remained hidden, that their power had not been extinguished. Secret sympathizers claimed visions of de Molay appearing in dreams, urging them to guard what remained. Chroniclers noted that in the years following, strange groups began to appear, societies whose symbols bore resemblance to Templar emblems, yet cloaked in new names. Was this coincidence, or was it evidence that the Order's mission had slipped into new vessels? Just as their Grand Master had slipped beyond the grasp of flame, the paradox lingers still. If the Templars were guilty of heresy, why did fate seem to confirm their innocence? If they were innocent, why did they guard their silence so fiercely? Even unto death, the truth may lie between. In the realm where knowledge is too dangerous for the world, yet too sacred to destroy. De Molay's silence at trial, broken only by his curse, suggests that he believed revelation would do more harm than concealment. By guarding the secret, even in fire, he ensured its survival beyond him, sealed not in words, but in legend. Today, Friday the 13th is remembered as an omen, and the curse of de Molay is recalled as proof of justice unseen. Yet perhaps it is more than omen, more than curse. Perhaps it is the echo of an inheritance that refused to be erased, a fragment of Atlantean knowledge preserved in silence, transmitted not through parchment or stone, but through the resonance of a final vow. Fire consumed the Order's body, but silence preserved its soul. And so the curse of fire remains, not only as prophecy fulfilled, but as a reminder that truth, once touched, cannot be destroyed. The Templars perished in smoke, yet their silence endures, carrying with it the suspicion that their greatest secret was never lost, but merely hidden, waiting still in the ashes of history. The vanished fleet remains one of the most haunting mysteries of the Templars' downfall. For just as the Order was struck by royal decree and papal curse, its greatest treasure slipped silently away, leaving behind no trace but whispers. At the port of La Rochelle, chroniclers recorded that a fleet of ships long maintained by the knights disappeared on the very night before arrests swept across France, Some claimed the vessels had been hastily loaded with gold, relics, and sacred texts. Others insisted the cargo was stranger still: chests of powder, fragments of devices, scrolls of emerald script. Whatever the truth, the ships sailed out beneath moonlight and vanished into the western sea, never to be recorded again. The paradox is striking: an order destroyed in a single day, yet its most guarded possessions escaped beyond reach. How could a king as powerful as Philip, backed by papal authority, fail to capture the fleet? Was it luck? Or was it careful planning? As though the Templars had foreseen their fate and prepared the exodus long before their enemies moved. To believe the latter is to accept that their silence concealed not only relics, but foresight, that they understood the tide would turn and made provision to preserve what mattered most. Where did the fleet go? Some believe it sailed north, finding refuge in Scotland, where sympathetic lords offered sanctuary. There, in secret valleys, relics may have been hidden in chapels later associated with Freemasons, their symbols echoing the same geometries carved into Templar churches. Others argued that the ships reached Portugal, where King Dinas welcomed the survivors and reconstituted them as the Order of Christ, a brotherhood that later guided explorers like Henry the Navigator. But the most provocative whispers claim the fleet sailed west into uncharted waters, carrying Atlantean knowledge across the ocean long before Columbus. Legends in the Americas tell of pale strangers who arrived with crosses and stars, teaching fragments of geometry and cosmology before vanishing again. In Mexico and Peru, myths describe gods who came from the sea with knowledge of architecture and resonance. Could these stories be distorted memories of Templar voyagers carrying not conquest, but fragments of a drowned inheritance? If so, then the vanished fleet did not vanish at all, but became seed, planting whispers of Atlantis on distant shores. The paradox lies in absence itself. No wrecks, no records, no confirmed landings have ever surfaced. Yet the silence is too neat, too complete. History often leaves fragments, yet here it leaves nothing, as if a deliberate hand erased every trace. Perhaps the fleet was never meant to be found. Perhaps it was the final act of Templar silence, the concealment of relics in places so remote, so unreachable, that even the wrath of kings and popes could not touch them. Later, societies claimed inheritance from the vanished fleet. Freemasons, Rosicrucians, and explorers alike hinted that their wisdom came from treasures carried across seas in secrecy. Maps emerged showing lands before they were discovered, coastlines of America and Antarctica drawn centuries too early. Could these maps have been copied from charts preserved aboard those ships? Charts tracing back to Atlantean survivors who once mapped the world in its wholeness? If so, then the fleet's cargo was not only material, but cartographic memory preserved in ink and star. What of the relics, the Grail, the Ark fragments, the Emerald Tablet? If such objects were loaded into the holds, then their fate remains entwined with the fleet. Some legends say they were buried in Scotland, hidden beneath Rosslyn Chapel. Others whisper they were guarded in Portugal, fueling voyages that expanded the edges of the known world. Still others claim they remain sealed on unknown islands, their power dormant, awaiting rediscovery in an age prepared to comprehend them. The silence of the fleet is itself a message. To vanish completely is to remain alive in memory, to haunt imagination without surrendering proof. If the ships had been captured, the relics paraded, the scrolls burned, then the Order's secret mission would have ended. But because the fleet disappeared, the mission endures, its possibility forever suspended, its truth forever withheld. The Templars were destroyed, yet their legacy sailed on, hidden in the night, carried into the unknown. And so the vanished fleet lingers at the edge of history, an absence too precise to be accidental, a silence too deep to be meaningless. Was it gold that was carried? Or was it something far more dangerous? Fragments of Atlantis itself, smuggled into exile to outlast inquisitors and kings? The sea does not answer, yet its silence speaks. A reminder that not all that vanishes is lost. Some disappearances are preservation, veils drawn to guard truths that cannot yet be faced. Survival and exile marked the next stage of the hidden current. For though the order was shattered in France, its symbols burned, its leaders consumed in fire, not all Templars perished. Some slipped into obscurity, blending into monasteries, donning new habits, vanishing into the countryside. Others fled beyond the reach of Rome, carrying with them relics, scrolls, and fragments of Atlantean lore. In Portugal, the Red Cross of the Templars did not die but was reborn, transfigured into the Order of Christ, an institution outwardly loyal to crown and altar, yet inwardly carrying the same discipline, the same structures, perhaps even the same secrets. King Denis, unwilling to betray men who had served with loyalty, simply changed their name, preserving them in form if not in title. It was under this order that Portugal began its great age of exploration. Prince Henry the Navigator, patron of voyages that mapped the coasts of Africa and opened seas unknown to Europe, bore symbols unmistakably linked to Templar tradition. Ships carried crosses upon their sails, echoes of banners once flown in Jerusalem. Charts appeared depicting coasts with uncanny accuracy, as though drawn not by discovery but by memory. Could it be that the vanished fleet had already carried fragments of Atlantean cartography into Portuguese hands? Fragments later unfurled in expeditions that reshaped the world? The paradox becomes sharper. Voyages portrayed as bold ventures of discovery may in fact have been rediscoveries, guided by knowledge preserved through Templar exile. In Scotland, two whispers of survival endure. Legends speak of Templar knights fighting alongside Robert the Bruce at Bannockburn in 1314, their sudden appearance turning the tide of battle. Though historians dismiss such accounts as myth, symbols carved into Rosslyn Chapel, built a century later, carry designs too closely tied to Templar lore to be coincidence. Among them are depictions of plants unknown in Europe at the time, maize and aloe, suggesting knowledge of the New World long before Columbus. How could such images exist unless survivors of the order, carrying charts and memories, had shared them with builders sworn to silence? Rosslyn thus becomes less a chapel than a codex, its stone walls echoing the silence of relics carried north. Elsewhere, survivors dissolved into secrecy. Some disguised themselves as stonemasons, transmitting their symbols into architecture. Others joined monastic orders, hiding fragments of scrolls within cloisters. A few perhaps carried relics across seas still uncharted, becoming legends in lands where strangers appeared and vanished like ghosts. The survival of the Templars was not an institution, but a scattering, seeds carried by wind, each germinating in secret societies that sprouted in later centuries. The Freemasons, the Rosicrucians, groups that spoke in allegory yet preserved geometries, codes, and rituals bearing unmistakable resemblance to the order burned in France. The paradox of survival and exile is that the order was destroyed precisely because it succeeded. If it had uncovered nothing beneath the Temple Mount, if it had guarded no dangerous knowledge, then persecution would have yielded confession and closure. Instead, even under torture, silence prevailed and relics vanished beyond reach. The very fact that fragments reappeared in Portugal, in Scotland, in secret societies suggests that their mission endured, transmuted but unbroken. Exile was not an end but a metamorphosis, concealment, not erasure. Symbols carry the proof. The Red Cross, redesigned but unchanged in essence, still adorns sails that cross the Atlantic. Labyrinths carved into cathedral floors whispered of inward journeys long after the order's name was condemned. Even the architecture of exploration, the mapping of stars, the building of ships aligned to celestial navigation, bears the signature of Templar silence, transformed into guidance. What was once guarded beneath Jerusalem now guided sails across oceans. And so the survival of the order was never meant to be obvious. It was meant to be silent, hidden in plain sight, preserved through architecture, exploration, and allegory. The kings who thought they had destroyed their debtors, the popes who believed they had erased heretics, succeeded only in scattering seeds into soil more fertile than they imagined. The Templars vanished in name but endured as current, a current still flowing through the stones of Rosslyn, through the voyages of Portugal, through the symbols of societies that emerged centuries later. The question lingers: did they preserve only symbols, or did they carry with them the relics themselves? The Grail, the Ark fragments, the Emerald Tablet, the Powder of Light. If so, then exile was not survival alone, but triumph. For what kings and popes sought to destroy was spirited away into secrecy, guarded still in silence. Survival in exile becomes not weakness but strategy, the transformation of a visible order into an invisible brotherhood, a continuity unbroken, though cloaked in shadow. Stones whisper more loudly than chronicles, for what is written can be censored or destroyed, but what is carved into architecture endures in silence. Across Europe, structures tied to the Templars preserve patterns too deliberate to be coincidence. Geometries embedded in cathedrals, labyrinths etched into floors, symbols woven into stained glass. Each is a cipher hinting at secrets the order could no longer proclaim aloud. These stones became codices, silent libraries of Atlantean inheritance disguised as piety. And to those with eyes trained to see, they revealed fragments of a science outlawed by kings and feared by popes. Rosslyn Chapel in Scotland is often cited as the most overt whisper, filled with carvings of vines, angels, and geometric knots that conceal unfamiliar plants, maize and aloe, unknown in medieval Europe. Such depictions imply knowledge of lands across the ocean long before official discovery, suggesting that survivors of the Templars, perhaps carrying maps from the vanished fleet, had passed fragments of memory into stone. But Rosslyn is only one example. Gothic cathedrals across France bear rose windows aligned to solstices, their intricate circles mirroring harmonic vibrations. Floor labyrinths, like that of Chartres, trace spirals inward, resonating with teachings that salvation is a journey into the self rather than a pilgrimage outward. Even their towers, soaring skyward, resemble crystalline spires, echoing descriptions of Atlantean cities that pulsed with energy drawn from earth and stars. The paradox is that these structures were sanctified by the very church that condemned the Templars. Priests blessed cathedrals, unaware that the designs themselves encoded heresy, embedding within sacred walls geometries that defied orthodoxy. It is as though the Templars inscribed their forbidden knowledge into the very heart of Christendom, hiding in plain sight, confident that stones could preserve what parchment could not. Architecture thus became their final scripture, a text immune to flame, surviving long after trials and executions erased their name. The whispers extend further. Masonic lodges claiming descent from builders inherited rituals steeped in geometry and allegory. Their tools, compass and square, level, are not only instruments of craft, but symbols of balance, proportion, and resonance. These emblems carved into medieval structures suggest continuity from Templar silence into later secret societies. The same geometries appear in Rosicrucian texts, where diagrams of circles and stars mirror cathedral windows, encoding principles of sound, light, and vibration as though drawn from the emerald itself. Each whisper suggests not invention, but inheritance, fragments of Atlantean science carried forward through stone. What was the purpose of such silent inscriptions? Perhaps preservation, ensuring that knowledge would survive beyond the destruction of the order. Perhaps communication, leaving coded messages for initiates who would come centuries later. Or perhaps activation, for some believe that cathedrals themselves function as instruments, structures designed not merely for worship but for resonance. Their vaulted ceilings amplify chant, their proportions create harmonics, and their stained glass filters light into patterns that stir consciousness. Were these temples of Christendom also devices, recreations of Atlantean principles hidden in sanctified form? If so, then the paradox deepens. The church that condemned the Templars as heretics may have unwittingly become custodian of their legacy, for the cathedrals remain standing, their geometries untouched, their secrets visible yet unrecognized. Each tourist gazing at a rose window sees beauty, Yet within the pattern lies the mathematics of resonance, the memory of vibration, a whisper of Atlantis preserved in colored glass. The silence of the Templars thus continues, speaking through architecture, audible only to those willing to listen. Legends even suggest that certain sites concealed chambers below, labyrinthine vaults aligned with sacred geometry, storing relics carried from Jerusalem. In Rosalind, rumors persist of sealed crypts where treasures of the fleet may rest. In Chartres, tales speak of underground chambers built upon druidic sanctuaries, preserving older wisdom beneath a Christian veneer. Whether true or myth, the persistence of these stories suggests that stone itself became a vessel, a vault both symbolic and literal, preserving relics beyond the reach of kings. The whispers are not confined to Europe. In the Americas, temples of the Maya and Inca echo with similar geometries, pyramids aligned with stars, chambers resonant with sound. Could it be that Templar survivors carrying Atlantean memory recognized in these structures the same inheritance they had sought in Jerusalem? If so, then stone whispers across continents, reminding us that knowledge once drowned has always resurfaced, encoded in architecture beyond the grasp of destruction. And so the paradox of stone is this: it is mute, yet it speaks. It is lifeless, yet it preserves. It is still, yet it carries resonance across centuries. The Templars may have vanished, their order broken, their name condemned, but their stones remain, whispering in silence the truths they could not utter. And in those whispers lies the suspicion that humanity's memory is older, stranger, and more deliberately concealed than the chronicles dare admit. The erased gospel is perhaps the most dangerous of all legacies linked to the Templars, for relics can be hidden, fleets can vanish, and cathedrals can encode secrets in stone. But words have the power to unravel worlds, and the writings they were rumored to guard threatened to do exactly that. Among the hidden scrolls were said to be accounts portraying Christ not as distant savior enthroned in majesty, but as a teacher of inner awakening, a bearer of knowledge inherited from times before Scripture, a vessel of wisdom aligned less with church ritual than with Atlantean continuity. If such gospels existed, they would not have denied the divine, but redefined it, revealing a vision where salvation was not earned through obedience, but through the unlocking of light already within. Accusations during their trials echo this possibility. The Templars were charged with denying Christ, with mocking the cross, with venerating figures other than the Son of God. Historians argue these were lies forced under torture. Yet what if they were distorted reflections of truths hidden in those Gospels? Perhaps the knights did not reject Christ, but embraced a vision too radical for their age, that he was not a solitary redeemer, but one among many initiates, inheriting and transmitting a knowledge that stretched back to a drowned civilization. In such a vision, the miracles of Christ were not exceptions granted by heaven, but demonstrations of universal principles: resonance, vibration, the power of word and thought to shape reality. Principles that Atlantis had once mastered and left encoded in fragments across the world. The paradox becomes unbearable for the medieval mind. If salvation was not bound to sacraments, if Christ's divinity lay not in separation but in demonstration, then the entire edifice of church authority crumbled. No pope could command obedience if every soul carried equal access to light. No priest could claim monopoly on forgiveness if sin itself was redefined as ignorance of one's inner power. These gospels, whether real or imagined, were dynamite, and the silence of the Templars may have been the only way to preserve both the knowledge and the fragile order of their world. Traces of such teachings bleed into later societies. Gnostic writings long buried in desert sands speak of Christ as the revealer of hidden wisdom. Hermetic texts attributed to sages older than Greece echo the same call to inner awakening. Even Rosicrucian manifestos of the 17th century, steeped in allegory, proclaim the union of science and spirit, light and matter, as though echoing fragments of a gospel never fully erased. Could all of these be the offspring of a single hidden tradition, preserved through silence, encoded in allegory, whispered in the margins of accepted history? The architecture of the Templars supports this suspicion. Cathedrals are filled with imagery of light, rose windows, radiant halos, geometric stars, all suggesting that enlightenment was the true path of salvation. Labyrinth floors trace spirals inward as though leading pilgrims not to distant shrines, but to the center of themselves. Such designs align with the erased gospel's core message, that the kingdom of heaven is not above, but within, accessible not through obedience, but through awakening. To walk the labyrinth was to walk the gospel itself, inscribed not in parchment, but in stone. Why would such gospels be erased? Because they threatened the foundation of empire. Kings ruled by divine right, but if divinity was universal, their power dissolved. Priests governed by monopoly on mystery, but if mystery was knowledge, their authority faded. The erasure was deliberate, for survival demanded it. Yet erasure is never perfect. Fragments endure in heresies condemned, in societies outlawed, in whispers that resurface centuries later. And the very violence with which the Templars were destroyed suggests that what they held was too close to truth to be tolerated. The paradox of the erased gospel is that its silence is its proof. If the writings were harmless, they would have been preserved as curiosities. If they were false, they would have been exposed and dismissed. But they were neither. They were hidden, suppressed, erased with fire and blood, precisely because they contained a truth too volatile to release. Whether that truth was Christ as Atlantean initiate, salvation as inner awakening, or divinity as universal light, we may never know. Yet its shadow shapes the silence that followed, and so the erased gospel lingers, not in libraries but in symbols, not in sermons but in myths. Was it real or was it rumor born of fear? The question itself is dangerous, for to ask it is to admit that history is not complete, but curated, arranged to exclude what might awaken. Perhaps the gospel was destroyed, or perhaps it still lies hidden in vaults beneath cathedrals, awaiting a time when humanity is prepared to receive it. Until then, its silence remains, a gap in the record that whispers louder than any written word. The last door unopened stands at the edge of memory like a silent sentinel. For after relics vanished, gospels were erased, fleets disappeared, and cathedrals whispered their secrets in stone, there still remains the sense that what the Templars truly guarded has never been revealed, not in trial records, not in symbols, not in the legends that surround them. History has unfolded like a corridor filled with doors. Some opened briefly before being closed again, others sealed permanently. Yet always ahead looms one more threshold, darker, heavier, seemingly eternal. This door is not guarded by kings or popes alone, but by the fabric of forgetting itself, by the deliberate rewriting of memory, by the silence passed from century to century like a sacred oath. The paradox of this final door is that it resists not only conquest, but also comprehension. We glimpse fragments, the powder of light, the divided ark, the grail reimagined, the emerald tablet, the spear of destiny, the erased gospel, but never the whole. Each appears like a shard of glass glinting in darkness, hinting at a greater mosaic concealed just beyond reach. The Templars, in silence, seem to have held the pieces. Yet whether they ever assembled them, we cannot know. Did they perceive the wholeness of the inheritance they guarded, or were they merely custodians of fragments, tasked with preservation but denied completion? This uncertainty is itself the lock upon the last door. Perhaps the door represents the survival of Atlantis itself, not as land or city, but as continuity, a current of knowledge flowing unseen through time. Survivors may have scattered across the world, hiding their wisdom in temples, scrolls, and relics. The Templars may have inherited fragments through excavation, contact, or chance. Yet the full design remained concealed. To open the last door would be to reawaken Atlantis, to restore a memory humanity has been forbidden to hold. But would such an awakening liberate or destroy? The silence of the Templars suggests they believed the world was not ready, that to preserve was safer than to reveal. Symbols carved into cathedrals, myths preserved in secret societies, rituals whispered in allegory, all may be attempts to guard the threshold without crossing it. Freemasons traced geometry, Rosicrucians wrote allegory, explorers carried maps of forgotten lands, yet none claimed to possess the whole. The last door remains sealed, not because it cannot be opened, but because opening it may unmake the world we know. For what happens when faith is revealed as science, when myth is revealed as memory, when history is revealed as deliberate amnesia? What happens when humanity realizes it has been taught to forget itself? The silence is both warning and invitation. The destruction of the Templars proved that guarding the threshold is perilous, yet their survival in exile shows that some truths cannot be eradicated. The last door remains because it is not only physical, but psychological. The barrier between what we are told and what we suspect, between the surface of history and the depths beneath. To open it is to step beyond the safety of accepted narrative into the abyss of the unknown. And yet the door waits, unbroken, untouched, looming like a vault of stone at the end of humanity's corridor. Behind it may lie relics preserved in secret vaults, scrolls unread, or perhaps nothing tangible at all. Only the realization that the fragments we hold already form the whole, if we dare to see them as such. The door may not open outward into a chamber, but inward into the mind, a reminder that memory itself is the vault, and we are the ones who keep it sealed. Thus the story ends not with resolution, but with suspension. The Templars vanished, yet their silence endures, whispering that the inheritance of Atlantis is not lost but waiting. Each artifact, each gospel, each fleet and chapel is a key, but the lock remains untouched. The last door still stands at the edge of history and the heart of memory, closed not by iron, but by the fear of what lies beyond. Now the candle burns low, its flame trembling as if burdened by the weight of what has been spoken. The long corridor of memory has been walked. Its doors open one by one, each revealing not certainty but shadow, not conclusion, but suggestion. And at the farthest end, where the silence grows deepest, we stand before the last door unopened, feeling its presence more than seeing its shape. It is not wood or stone alone, but the veil of forgetting itself, a barrier woven of silence and fear. What remains is not knowledge, but awareness, not answers, but questions that linger like echoes in the night. Were the Templars truly guardians of the Atlantean inheritance? Or were they seekers who glimpsed fragments too vast for comprehension? Did they protect relics of power or only the memory of what might have been? Was their silence preservation or was it warning? The questions multiply, yet none resolve. For the design of this story is not to close but to open, not to conclude but to awaken. Let the silence now soften like mist descending over ancient stone. Let the cadence slow, each word lengthening into stillness. The mysteries remain untouched yet present, alive in the spaces between what is said and what is withheld. The night carries them forward as it has for centuries, a quiet current beneath the noise of history. As the flame dwindles, so too does the need for certainty. What matters is not the answer, but the willingness to listen, to let suspicion breathe, to let curiosity live, to let the silence speak. For perhaps the last door is not meant to be broken, but to be honored, left closed, yet never forgotten.